Hi, everybody. It's Mr. Steger. I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about tracking your science learning targets this year. So, um, what we traditionally have done is teachers have had these objectives that students have all worked towards. A teacher identified what they're doing and why they're doing it, created experiences for students. Everybody did the same thing at the same time, did the same stuff, turned in the same things, and kind of marched along in step. Um, so the students were looking to the teacher to understand what was to be done. The teacher had a clear idea of what those objectives in the class were. So with learning targets, it's a little different, or at least I interpret this a little bit differently. Right now, what I'm doing is when I've got a plate of learning targets, a spreadsheet of learning targets, I'm trying to create experiences for students to meet those targets. So I don't have one thing picked out, although I may create experiences where it's obvious that what we're doing is going to meet that target. But how you work on that could be expanded into other areas, other learning targets. So the teacher creates experiences in this situation where students can look at what they're doing and what they're learning and then submit evidence that they've learned that target or this target or several targets at one time. So students in one room in a physical setting in a classroom can be meeting different learning targets and showing that learning differently. So what tool do we use? Well, because it was somewhat complicated for students to understand where they were and what they had done and how well they had done it, I created an interactive spreadsheet that will give you a snapshot of what's been completed and how well you did on those targets. The spreadsheet itself is what I've got. I've got a screenshot of it on this image, and you see a bunch of zeros and a lot of red or pink shaded areas. So the zero, when a zero is in a space, the space next to it, the target and the description, are colored depending on what that value is. As you look more closely in another video that I'll share with you, the targets and the descriptions and the resources are made available to you to help you understand more clearly what the expectations of science learning looks like. This has gone through a change from what I initially started with, because it became clear to me that students were trying to meet learning targets, but the words that I used were kind of teacher words, and the students didn't quite understand them. So what we did, a group of students met with me, and over the course of a couple of weeks, we actually took apart the targets and rewrote them from a student's point of view so they knew what they meant. It was also discussed that it was really important to have descriptions available for students so that, okay, there's a sentence that tells me what the target is, but can you kind of give me an idea of what that might look like? So in this case, I'm going to look at ID1, so interpretation of data. It's the first target. I can understand the use and application of data. So I've got a 5 down here right now, meaning that if this were a student's, I would have said, hey, you submitted evidence for ID1. I looked at it. You nailed it. You actually go above kind of what I expected you to understand on this. So I'm going to give you a 5. You really understand this. The description will tell you what that target's all about. So in this case, data is found or created to support arguments or new learning. So that kind of gives you an idea of what that target's all about. Now, let's say you take a look at this target and you're kind of like, I'm not quite sure what that means. Well, I've got some examples and resources available for you. And I use a Science Buddies website that I feel is really strong in providing a foundational knowledge of science itself and how science is done. And it'll give you kind of the key information. It will give you overviews of what data and analysis is. It'll talk to you about specific things, give you some examples. In this case, it's going to show you, well, I'm not going to open up the Excel spreadsheet or the PDF, but it'll show you examples of what data looks like and how it's graphed. And the part I think is really important is that as you go through and you show those things to me, um, to have a checklist. So if you're supplying me with your understanding of data and how it's used, having a checklist like this is really invaluable for you as a student to be able to say, hey, I nailed this. And you could even use this in your evidence submission form, which I talk about in another video. So I hope this helps with you. If you have any questions with it, please feel free to ask me, and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation.